this series, you will notice that the subtitle is Guarding Against the Devil's Devices. And we're focusing really on that word devices. I already alluded to it in this service, but there's lots of different devices in our culture. We call them devices. That's the very word we use. Cell phones, tablets, laptops, computers. I don't have one yet, but Alexa, or I forget Google's name, but you got these. You know, one time I was preaching and I said something, and all of a sudden Siri thought I was asking her a question, and my phone went off. So it's just that's the culture we live in. So I was just thinking, how many devices do you think we have in our church? How many have we already asked questions and searched? How many times have we done that today alone? Just think about it. But there are also other kinds of devices, aren't there? The Bible speaks of the devil's devices. Okay, so let's just stop here. For some reason, I'm having trouble speaking this morning, and I can't seem to speak English very well, and I don't know any other languages, so we're in real trouble.
It's your time.
But I'm gonna try again. Now, I remember years ago we had a lady. Her name was Ginger. She's a sweetheart. She always had advice, and Ginger one time said, "Just relax if you get tongue-tied." She says, "Sometimes I do that too. And the way I do it is I stop and think about it and I say something funny. Like this." And she said, "I got my tongue tangled around my eye teeth. I can't see a word I'm saying." So I'm trying to get untangled up here, but you listen better and it'll sound better, okay? So, but for this series, I used last week an illustration of painting our laundry room, and really that has become a backdrop for this whole series. I talked about how I painted behind the dryer where nobody ever sees, and then there underneath the stand along the bottom of the wall, and I'm painting in there, and I'm thinking, whoever is going to see this? But I realized it was important to have a good work ethic and to do the right thing. And I challenged you this way. I said, our lives are sort of like that. We do a lot of work that nobody really ever sees. It's in the privacy of our heart. This series is like that. The Lord's doing work in the places where it's not really open to the public. But let's let Him go in there and see and make suggestions and offer changes that need to happen. That little story that is the backdrop, it reminded me of my one painting joke. You know that preachers have an illustration for everything, and this is my one for painting. There's a guy that had been given the privilege to paint the church, and it was an old clapboard building, and it needed a new fresh coat of white paint. But this guy, people didn't know it, but he was kind of a cheater and a scoundrel, and he was cheating his customers out of money. What he was doing, he'd take the paint and just sort of water it down a little bit. That way he could have the appearance that he was painting good quality. They wouldn't be any wiser, but he could spend less money on the paint. And so sure enough, even for the church, I mean, that's pretty brave, right? He painted the church, but he watered it down. And man, it's a beautiful sunshiny day. And he rolled it out, and he got it just finally finished. And as he's finishing up, the clouds start rolling in. And as he's standing there in the front lawn of the church, huge rainstorm and thunderstorm, lightning and thunder, and it just starts raining. And it just absolutely washed all the paint right off the building. And so as he's standing there, he said, "I think this is a sign, God. I think this is a real sign you're showing me. I shouldn't have cheated you. I'm sorry. What would you have me do?" And the heavens opened up, and he heard the voice of God speak. "Repaint. Repaint. And sin no more."
You're stretching it. That's really...
Okay, so today's talk is titled Blue Truth Devices. Blue Truth devices. Since Pastor Mo last week, he kind of got us going on this idea of VeggieTales. How many of you were here to see that? You know, and it got me thinking about my favorite VeggieTales moments. And there's two of them. One of them, do you remember when Larry lost his hairbrush and he's singing, "Where is my hairbrush?" Just loved that. Now, some of you are not VeggieTales fans, and I can tell right now. But my other favorite moment is when Miss Blueberry is singing, and she's so blue. She's so blue, she don't know what to do. You know, blue truth devices. Truth is blue in our day. It really is. You think about our culture and the things that are accepted in our culture as norms, and some even as laws that fly in the face of what God instructs. Think about abortion. How many abortions happen in our land? Think about how many marriages now end in divorce. How sad, how that breaks God's heart. And I'm always careful to say, please always know, many people have gone through the pain of divorce that did not want divorce, that did not choose divorce, that were the victim of a situation in which you have to, it takes two to tango, they say. And I understand that. The crime rate in our country, the amount of people in prison, the liberal agenda of many that flies in the face of biblical Christianity. A number of years ago, I wrote this song, and it was sort of hinting at that very thing, and it's titled "A Guy on a Journey," and this is one of the verses. It says, "We have friends on our profiles, we are linked and we're liked, but our networks are not very social. We LOL, but just not inside. Isolated, all together, crowding cyber space, texting and sexting our children. Are we losing the human race? The church bells are ringing and the choir is singing as the drug lords wreak havoc at will. And the preacher is preaching and the teacher is teaching. But the lesson's unlearned even still. The politicians keep winning just to get caught in sinning while the national credit tree falls. We are building and buying and borrowing and crying. Can we stand the dysfunction of it all? See, truth is blue in America today. So blue that sometimes we don't know what to do. I'm going to read this morning again from the DRC, and if you were not here last week, I would encourage you to just go back and check out that video to see sort of the background to it. But we're going to read from Nehemiah chapter 9. And before we read this, I want to set it in its context. Because as one great teacher, Brother Rogers from the West Texas District years ago, a wonderful Bible scholar, was fond of saying, a text without a context is a pretext.
Amen.
So, let's put it in its context. Nehemiah received favor from a Persian king. Now, last week we talked about a king named Xerxes. Do you remember the story where it was a wonderful story of Esther and how God elevated Esther and rescued the Jewish people? Well, today the story is really about Nehemiah, and the irony is that last week we talked about King Xerxes. This week we're going to talk about a king named Artaxerxes. Artaxerxes was the son of Xerxes. So now we're moving one generation further. And the story, it starts with Nehemiah serving under King Artaxerxes. And it's, Bible scholars tell us this is 444 years before Jesus comes on the scene. And Nehemiah, he was the cupbearer for the king. That doesn't mean that he only served beverages, but he was part of the elite serving staff for the king. And it was a very respected position. And but Nehemiah, here's what's been happening. In the previous years, Jerusalem has fallen into a state of disrepair. And I'm going to tell you the more full version of that story a little bit later. But he's concerned about his homeland, and he fears that that his people are not doing what they're called to do, and that they're blowing the wonderful opportunity that God's giving them, and that sort of thing. So it leads him through a series of events until he comes to this time in chapter 9, which is really a time of open prayer to God. And this is what we're going to focus on. Nehemiah chapter 9, verse 32 says, "Now, therefore, our God, great, strong, and terrible, who keepest covenant and mercy, turn not away from thy face and all the labor which hath come upon us, upon our kings and our princes, and our priests and our prophets, and our fathers, and all the people from the days of the king of Ashur until this day." Now, Ashur was an ancient city. And really, Ashur, which was a great ancient city, became the nation Assyria, or code word Babylon. This became Babylon. And really what Nehemiah is talking about here, what he's saying is, God, you've always kept covenant with us. Don't stop now. Don't forget. Please keep covenant with us. So now read that part again with me. Just follow along. It says, "Turn not away from thy face all the labor which hath come upon us." And then he names 4 groups. See if you don't see these 4 groups clearly. Number 1, upon our kings and our princes. Number 2, upon our priests and our prophets. Number 3, and our fathers. And number 4, and all the people. You know, Martin Luther, who lived back in the 1500s, the time of the church going through tremendous reforms, so much so that it became known as the Reformation. Martin Luther believed that there were 4 entities ordained by God: the state, the church, the marriage, and the labor force. And now think about Luther's 4 groups and compare it to this verse. Upon our kings and our princes, that's the state, it's government. Kings and princes, that's the generation that exists and the generation to come. That perpetual, ongoing role of government. Number 2, our priests and our prophets, that's the church. It's Old Testament church. The true formation of the church, I believe, happened on the day of Pentecost, but there's definitely hints of God's church and God's people all through the Old Testament, and this is really the precursor of the 5-fold ministry gifts that we read about later on in Ephesians. And by the way, isn't it interesting that the Bible moves from the progression? If you look at the groups of the Bible, you start with the Pentateuch, the law, first 5 books of the Bible. Whenever Jesus was referring to the law, he meant the Pentateuch, the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible. That is the law. And so it moves from the law to the judges. Judges, that's government. It moves from the judges and judges, I should say judges and kings. From judges and kings, it moves to the prophets. That's church. And so these 2 groups, you got the kings and the princes, and the priests and the prophets, and our fathers. That's the marriage. That's families. That's fathers and mothers. That's sons and daughters. That's brothers and sisters. That's grandfathers and grandmothers. The nuclear family. And then lastly, and all the people. That's the labor force. This is the community. It's the fact that we all have a part to play. The fact that we are all responsible. Now, I know I'm taking a little bit of time with this verse, but it's intentional. I want to unpack it for you. I want you to read it again, thinking of what Luther described, the state, the church, the marriage, the labor force, and really think about this. Think of how God's people, their government, their spiritual leaders, their families, and their very job assignments, they are being led in repentance by Nehemiah. So reading it in that light, now therefore our God, great, strong, and terrible, who keepeth covenant and mercy, turn not away from thy face all the labor which hath come upon us, upon our kings and princes, and our priests and prophets, and our fathers, and all the people from the days of the king of Assur until this day. And thou art just in all things that have come upon us, because thou hast done truth. But we have done wickedly. Nehemiah names the 4 leadership groups, the breakdown of society. And he says, Lord, you are just, you have done truth, but we have done wickedly. What does he mean? Well, if you were to read the book of Nehemiah, you get the picture. Blue truth devices. Truth is blue in his day. As I have said, it is in many ways in America today. Think about the story of Nehemiah, if you will, for a moment. So, if you go back in history, there's this guy named Solomon. 1,000 years before Christ, he builds a temple. Up to that point, the Jewish people had only had a tent. They called it the tabernacle for the Lord. And it was a tent that housed the most holy place. And you had the Ark of the Covenant and the table of showbread and the lampstand and all of the holy items. And David, Solomon's father, wanted something better. David wanted to build a temple for God. He said, it's not right. We live in these beautiful paneled homes. God has to live in a tent. And God, it's interesting the interaction between him and David. He wasn't quite so sure that he really wanted that. I mean, in his language, like, did I ask you to do this for me? But okay, all right. In fact, he says, do you think a building can contain me? I made all the heavens and the earth. But nonetheless, I'll go along with it. However, David, you are not the one to build the temple because you've shed blood in numerous warfare. You've been in numerous wars, and you are the one who shed blood. But your son, he will build the temple. And so Solomon comes along and he does just that, doesn't he? Solomon has all the provision from his father, and he builds a beautiful temple. I mean, it was ornate. It was spectacular. It had pomegranates engraved in the wooden trusses, and it had gold covering all of the pillars, and it was just spectacular. It was immaculate. It was amazing, and the kingdom was going really good under Solomon. I mean, these were the best of times. In fact, the Queen of Sheba says, I've heard about you, Solomon, and I want to see this thing. I want to see if it's true. And boy, she comes and brings a whole entourage, and they do an official visit of state, and they come, and she has the dinner at the banquet, and she asks questions of Solomon, and when she's done, she says, whew, man, people said that you really got your act together, but Solomon, they didn't even tell me half of it. This is amazing. Look at how your servants, how they're dressed and how pristine everything is. And it's so perfect. And it was really good. Although sin had entered into Solomon's heart, didn't it? And after him, the kingdoms divide in two. And then you track with the kingdom of Judah versus the kingdom of Israel. All of them Jewish people. kingdom of Judah tends to be more godly, by and large. The kingdom of Israel, they engaged in all kinds of wicked practices, but they all drifted away from God until 400 years pass. And a guy named Nehemiah is born. Now, here's what happened in between that time. Think about it. 400 years, that's a long time. I mean, can you imagine, go all the way back to George Washington's time? How long is that? You're not even close. 400 years have passed. A lot of things have happened. And one of the things that happened was that the temple that was so beautiful, which Solomon had built, was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians. They came in and razed it to the ground. And scores of Jewish people were sent off in captivity like slaves. But before Nehemiah was born, God had done some amazing things. God raised up a heathen pagan king named Cyrus who says, this just isn't right. We're going to rebuild that temple. They deserve to have a temple. And so they rebuilt it 550 some odd, maybe 565, 100 years before Jesus was born. And so now several decades have passed. And many of the Jewish people have gone back to Jerusalem. And they've got the temple all right. But Jerusalem, the walls were absolutely devastated and destroyed. And Nehemiah had gotten a report, because he's still part of the people who are living under the Persian king and serving in that kingdom. And he gets a report, what's going on in our homeland? What's it like back at Jerusalem? And the report comes back to him, it's not good. The walls are in disrepair, they've been tumbled, they've been destroyed. Yeah, there's a temple there, but they're not observing the faithful practice of ongoing sacrifice. There's a lot of fear that the enemy's going to invade at any moment. There's no money. The people are just scattered. It's not looking good. It's really blue. And so Nehemiah, the start of the story, it says that he appears before the king one day. He's serving him. He brings him his cup. He brings him his food. And he says, I had never been sad in the king's presence before. You don't want to be sad in the king's presence. Because if you just look the wrong way, he could say, yeah, I don't like him. Take him out back and let's get rid of that guy. So you always want to be very pleasant in front of the king. But that day he was sad. And the king says, what's wrong with you, Nehemiah? Nehemiah was afraid. And he says, I've never been sad in the king's presence before. And in that moment, when he's so afraid, but he felt the boldness in him, and incidentally, you read the text, it says, and he prayed. He prayed in that moment. He couldn't have had but just a brief moment to pray, but he said, oh, God, help me. Something. Lord, what am I going to say? Please protect me. You know, how on the outside we can just look so smooth and easy, but on the inside we're just a bundle of nerves. And he says basically to this king, well, oh great king, rule forever, by the way. Why shouldn't I be sad? Why shouldn't I be blue? My people are in chaos. Our homeland is just in ruins. What do I got to be happy? He says to him, what do you propose to do? Well, if it pleased the king, could you send people with me, with money and backing? I want to make a trip to go back to Jerusalem. We're going to get a team together and we're going to rebuild the walls all around the city. It's a huge project. We don't have money. We just got plenty of vision. And the king says, how long are you going to be gone? Boy, and he sets it up and he sends him with an edict with his own seal on it saying, you have my permission to go back to Jerusalem and repair the city. And so, can you just imagine Nehemiah? He rolls into town. It says it's after dark that first night. With lamps, he goes out and he's walking around the city looking at the walls. And oh my goodness, it's way worse than I thought. There's the entire section of the wall is missing all the way between the sheep gate and the fish gate. What are we going to do? And he's walking around. Oh, that's a structure kind of a thing. That's a load-bearing wall. And look at how it's not in. It's horrible. But after that night, then the next day he says, here's the deal. You know that I'm a servant of the king. He has blessed me. He's given me the money to repair it. I'm just saying to all of my brothers and sisters, Jewish people, come on. Let's do this thing. What are we waiting for? We got to build back up Jerusalem. And he rallies the troops. And they start to build the wall. And when they first start to build the wall, the enemy looks on, and there's a guy named Sennacherib and another guy named Tobiah, and they're looking on, and they're like, can you believe this? That wall is so flimsy. Why, even if a fox jumps on, it's going to fall down. But they keep building the wall. And then the wall gets raised up a little bit, and then they're like, well, they're kind of making some progress, and they keep building the wall. And the wall goes a little higher. And now they're getting a little bit bothered by it. And so they say, hey, Nehemiah, come on out here with us. We want to invite you to come and join with us in an allegiance. And let's just join together. And Nehemiah says, yeah, I'm way too busy. Can't do that right now. I've got a major project I'm working on. And they keep building the wall. Until finally the gaps get filled in and the wall is going higher and higher. And now they're connecting gate from gate with ramparts and a wall so thick the chariots can ride on the top of it. And they just keep building and building. And then the enemy becomes so disturbed with it all that he says, here's what we're going to do. He tries to blackmail a priest to go in, a prophet, go in and lie to him. Do anything to get him to come meet you at the designated location, and then we can take him out. And the prophet goes to Nehemiah and says, thus the Lord has said, da, 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 da. And Nehemiah says, you know what? God revealed to me that you are lying. Get out of here. And they keep building the wall. And miracle of miracles, in 52 days, they repaired and rebuilt all the walls of Jerusalem. It was a miracle story. Now, I want you to read on this next part. Verse 36 says, so here's the thing. Behold, we ourselves this day are bondmen. And the land which thou gavest our fathers, there's the fathers again, to eat the bread thereof and the good things thereof, we ourselves are servants in it. And the fruits thereof grow up for the kings, there's the kings again, whom thou hast set over us for our sins. And they have dominion over our bodies and over our beasts according to their will, and we are in great tribulation. And because of all of this, we ourselves make a covenant and write it. Our princes, here's the kings and princes again, our Levites and our priests, there's the priests again and the prophets, sign it. Leah, I wonder if you could put for just a moment verse 35 back up there. At the end of verse 35, look at that. They did not return from their most wicked devices. Say devices. Look at this. This is after what we've read. Our kings, our priests, our princes, our priests, and our fathers have not kept the law. They did not return from their most wicked devices. I want to just share with you quickly, and I'm just like last week, I'm bringing it to a close with 3 observations, and this is the first one, and it comes under the heading, what do you do when the situation is so bad that, number 1, what do you do when the situation is so bad that your countenance is disturbed? I mean, think about that. Nehemiah, he's just going through his routine, and the king says, Nehemiah, what is up with you? His countenance was disturbed. To use a little bit of lingo that we use sometimes about our devices. Sometimes we need to check our signal. Maybe we're not getting signal. Somebody one time said it this way: if you are joyful, notify your face. But sometimes we can't help it, right? In fact, it's hard being me. It's easier being you, I promise you. Because here's the thing about me. I have one of those faces, I can't hide one thing that I'm thinking. I don't know what it is. And I often will tell Stephanie, my face has a mind of its own. I can tell you're upset because you just did that look. I didn't do a look. Oh yeah, you did. Your countenance is disturbed. Or number two, what do you do when the situation is so bad that you are not willing for things to stay the same? I know that if I mention this to the king, he could say, take that guy out back, get rid of him. But it's so bad that, what am I going to do? I'm not willing for things to stay the same. In your life, you will come to a point where you just get so sick of being sick that you say, I'm done with this. I don't care what it means, but something's got to change. I can't stay the way I am. Can anyone relate to that? I want a change. I want something better for myself, and I am not willing to stay here. I took my phone into the store one day because it was having some problems, and the guy's asking me, the guy's about 12 years old, and he's going through all this stuff, and he's asking me questions, things that I don't know, and I'm just kind of nodding and smiling. Yeah, okay. And then eventually he says, well, tell me precisely, what does it do? And I said, well, this is what's going on. He says, well, have you tried doing a soft reset? And I said, I probably would if I knew what that was. He said, oh, that's just where you power down and then you power back up. He said, do you turn your phone off each day and then back on? And I got to thinking, well, I wake up with it, it's my alarm, and then I start the emails and the texts, and I read from it during my devotion time. Use it all day for stuff. At the end of the night, I leave it turned on because sometimes there's emergencies in the night. People call, I just plug it in. I said, you know what? No, I never turn it off. He said, well, that's the problem. He said, all devices are intended to have a soft reset every day. You make stupid decisions when you're exhausted. You need a soft reset every day. You need to power down and then power up. And if you're not willing for things to stay the same, then you will do it. And then, number three, what do you do when the situation is so bad that you are finally brave enough to ask the king for your requests? You've had desires in your heart just sort of bouncing around, rattling in there, clinking inside your heart, inside your mind. You haven't taken the time to really pinpoint just what is it that I need. There's something aching, there's something numb, there's something that's painful, but you just sort of pray in general ways, and finally you get sick of it and you say, I've had enough, something's got to change. Well, then the king says, what is it you want? What do you want? Here's how I say it. Connect to hi-fi. Not Wi-Fi. By the way, do you remember when Wi-Fi signs started coming out? I remember going in a restaurant and saying, you have a free Wi-Fi. Well, I've already got a Wi-Fi. She's right here. Connect to hi-fi. Our our culture, there's a lot of blue truth right now in our culture. Next week, when we come together, I'm going to share with you tips for the family, tips for parenting. For instance, did you know that it's dangerous to raise children in current culture? It's a dangerous thing to give a child unlimited access and then not have any accountability to that. Because there are companies that target children. Even in their design, they will design ways to fool mom and dad and then load up the advertisement with ways that target young people only. And so I'm going to be giving you some tips for parenting. And then 2 weeks from today, we're going to talk about biblical sexuality. And our devices have to come under the lordship of Jesus Christ, under the blood of Jesus. But for today, this is what I want you to take away with you. It's a no-contract, wireless connection. It's a no-contract, wireless connection. This connection that we have with the Lord. It's not Bluetooth. It is truth. And it's way better than a contract. 2 Corinthians says this. This is New Testament terminology because we've been talking about a guy, Nehemiah, that lived under the Old Covenant. But here's the New Covenant. Paul says to the church in Corinth, He has made us competent. He has made us competent as ministers of a new covenant. It's not a contract. It's a covenant. Often when I do weddings, I will say this as part of the wedding, or sometimes in pre-marriage counseling with the couple, that this is not a contract that we're entering into. This is a covenant. A contract says, if this happens, then there's some contingencies, then I'm out. But a covenant says, some days you're going to be mean to me, and some days you're going to say things that aren't nice. Some days you're going to be in a bad mood. But I covenant that we together with our God, we will be in a covenant relationship. And so that's very serious language. We don't, there are states in the United States that are practicing contract marriages. Call it by different names, but loopholes that if this doesn't happen, then there's contingencies. But a covenant is what we practice and what we believe. And it's the same way in your walk with Jesus Christ. It is not a contract. It is a covenant. That covenant is signed, sealed, and delivered. In fact, we read about Nehemiah and the priest signing on it. It's a covenant agreement. But follow along, not of the letter, but of the Spirit. For the letter kills, but the Spirit gives life. So it's wireless. It's not something that is written out, a code that you take around with you, but it's Spirit. It's not a contract, it's a covenant, and it is wireless. It is God's Spirit. The letter says this is a burden, this is something you have to do, and you've got to be good enough, and if you don't measure up, then judgment. But God says, no, we're in a covenant with this spiritual way of ministry. So verse 7, now if the ministry that brought us death was engraved in letters on stone, if that brought us death, which was engraved in letters of stone, and it came with glory. Now think about what he's saying. He's saying the old covenant was written and etched in stone, and it was the letter of the law. In fact, we didn't get into it this morning, but Nehemiah, when it speaks of commandments, it's a play on word, because there were the 10 commandments. And they are embedded in Torah. I mentioned Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, the law. So that's the law. But the Jewish people had carried it much further than that. And they elaborated 613 commandments that must be adhered to. And if you failed on any one of them, then you must offer sacrifice to make recompense for what you have done. And so, really, when Paul is writing this letter to the Corinthians, he's saying that was not the best thing. That was leading to something better. But he says, but even that system of the law and the codes and the commandments, it came with glory. So, what he's saying, how much more? He says, so the Israelites could not look steadily at the face of Moses because of its glory, transitory though it was. Will not the ministry of the Spirit be even more glorious? We have an amazing privilege to walk in unbroken fellowship with God by His Holy Spirit, leading us, guiding us, directing us, ordering our steps. And it's not a contract. It's not a covenant. I mean, it's not a contract that you have to abide by the letter of the law, but it's this covenant relationship where every morning we wake up and say, good morning, Lord. Here I am. I'm your servant. Fill me with your Spirit today. Let me be used for you today. Let me walk in relationship wherever you send me today. And so, as the worship team comes back up, I'm going to request that they would sing that same song that they closed out earlier with. And that song that speaks of God's justice flowing like the tide coming in and coming out. And as they're singing, I'm asking you, what would you request of the King? Just imagine today that you're standing before the King of Glory, and He looks at you and says, why are you so blue? That's not like you. What's going on? And you have enough courage to say, oh King, live forever. Here's the request of my heart. Are you brave enough to ask Him what you're really longing for, the longing of your heart? I didn't prepare Pastor Dale this way, but I'm feeling as though we should have the prayer team come. And I want to ask Pastor Dale and any of you that are part of the prayer team who have ministered praying with folks, would you come and just be available here across the front? And as they're singing and as they're worshiping, if you have a prayer need in your life, just come to one. If you have a bold belief and a bold hope, then just come and declare it and believe that God's going to give you the answer to your prayers today. Prayer team members, would you come? The Lord's going to use the message, I believe, here in a few moments to lead up to a point where you have finally the courage to just ask Him, to ask a favor of the King. Been hinting around about it. You've been saying maybe, could you? But you're going to have a boldness to approach the King and say, I really need this. This is pure. My heart is right. Lord, I need your justice to flow in this situation. But for right now, I want to ask you to just trust Him. And while the team sings it once more, just bring your pure worship. Bring your pure worship that you trust Him, that you really do trust Him. Maybe you even need to discard some stuff in your heart, or perhaps you even need to apologize. Lord, I'm sorry, but I'm just being real with you. And He's not afraid of you being real. He's got broad shoulders. He can handle it. Trust Him. Bring your worship team. Just lead us.